Humans were only legends, until we advanced into battle Part 1. The war had lasted 300 years, and the Alliance was losing. High Admiral stood on the command deck of his flagship and watched another colony burn on the Collective had taken everything from them. World after world had fallen. Fleet after fleet had been destroyed. 6 species had joined together to fight, and 6 species were now facing extinction. Was old. He had seen his children die in this war. He had seen his brought to its knees. The Alliance had perhaps a year left before they would finish what they started. There was no hope remaining, only the slow wait for the end. The ancient texts spoke of salvation. They spoke of a species from a distant arm of the galaxy, creatures born on a world of death and violence. These beings were said to hunt their prey across endless distances, never stopping, never tiring. They healed from wounds that would kill any other species. They ate poisons and called them medicine. They bonded with predators and made them into companions. The texts called them humans, and most believed they were nothing but myths. Stories told to frighten children, legends from a time before recorded history. Had never believed in legends. He believed in ships and weapons and the cold mathematics of war, and the mathematics said his people would die. The censor officer spoke suddenly, her voice sharp with confusion. A vessel had emerged from hyperspace at the edge of the battle zone. It was small, barely larger than a patrol craft. Its design was unlike anything in the Alliance database. The hull was thick and heavy, built to survive impacts that would tear through armor. The ship moved with strange confidence, as if it did not understand the danger it had entered. Ordered his fighters to intercept. He expected the vessel to flee or surrender. Instead, it held position and broadcast a message in a language no one recognized. The translation system struggled for several moments before producing words that made blood run cold. The message said, "We are humans, we come in peace. We heard your distress signals, we want to help." The small ship was brought aboard's flagship under heavy guard. Soldiers lined the docking bay, weapons ready. Scientists and scholars waited behind them, their instruments prepared to study whatever emerged. The entire ship held its breath as the airlock opened. The first human stepped out and felt his heart stop. She was tall, though not unusually so. Her skin was a soft brown, her eyes dark and alert. She moved with a grace that spoke of hidden strength, each step balanced and purposeful. She wore a simple uniform with no armor, as if she had no fear of the weapons pointed at her. Behind her came others, 4 in total, each as calm as the first. The lead human raised her empty hands and smiled. It was a gesture that showed her teeth, and several soldiers stepped back in alarm. Those teeth were the teeth of a predator, flat in front for tearing but sharp on the sides for cutting meat. "My name is Grace Holland," she said. Her voice was warm and steady. "I am a commander in the United Earth Exploration Corps. We have been traveling for a long time, looking for intelligent life. We found your distress beacons 3 months ago and came as fast as we could." Stepped forward slowly. His guards tensed, but he waved them back. He had read the legends 1,000 times. He knew what humans were supposed to be, but this female showed no aggression. Her eyes were kind. "The legends say your kind are monsters," said. "They say you come from a world where everything tries to kill you. They say you cannot be stopped once you begin hunting." Grace Holland nodded. "Earth is not an easy place to live. We had to fight for everything we have. But we are not monsters, Admiral. We are just people who refuse to give up." A younger human male stepped forward. He was broad and muscular, with pale skin and light hair. His eyes scanned the soldiers with a calm assessment that made them uncomfortable. This was Lieutenant Daniel Perry, and could see immediately that this one was a warrior. "We detected the energy signatures of your battles from several light years away," Daniel said. "Someone is attacking you. Someone is winning. We thought you might need assistance." Laughed, though there was no joy in it. "Assistance. The Collective has 1,000 ships. They have conquered half the galaxy. What can 5 humans on one small vessel do against that? Grace stepped closer. She was shorter than, but somehow she seemed to fill the space around her. Her presence was magnetic, impossible to ignore. "We did not come alone, Admiral," she said. "We came to see if you were real. Now that we know you are, now that we know you need help, we will bring more, many more." Studied her face. He had commanded fleets for 60 years. He had negotiated with leaders of 6 different species. He knew how to read deception in any face, any form. But this human showed only sincerity, only determination. "Why would you help us?" he asked. "You do not know us, we are nothing to you." Grace tilted her head slightly. Humanity spent thousands of years looking at the stars and wondering if we were alone. We built telescopes and radio dishes and sent messages into the void, hoping someone would answer. We are not alone anymore. We found you and you are suffering. How could we possibly walk away from that? A long silence followed. Felt something stir in his chest, something he had not felt in decades. It took him a moment to recognize it as hope. Finally, he asked the only question that mattered. "How many ships do you have?" Grace Holland smiled again, and this time did not flinch at her teeth. Her smile was not the smile of a predator. It was the smile of someone who had been waiting her entire life for this moment. "How many do you need?" she asked. In that moment, standing in the docking bay of his dying flagship, surrounded by the remnants of a failing alliance, allowed himself to believe. The legends had spoken of monsters. Perhaps they had been wrong. Perhaps humans were not monsters at all. Perhaps they were something far more dangerous to the collective. Perhaps they were hope. Humans were only legends, until we advanced into battle, Part 2. The Alliance Council chamber had not seen such chaos in a century. Representatives from 6 species shouted over each other, their translators struggling to keep pace. At the center of the room, Grace Holland stood perfectly still, waiting for the storm to pass. Daniel Perry stood beside her, his arms crossed, watching the aliens argue about whether to accept their help. Council representative of the rose from his seat. He was a creature, tall and thin, with 4 arms and compound eyes that reflected the chamber lights. His voice clicked and buzzed as he spoke, and the translation came through cold and hostile. "The legends call them death," said. "The old texts warn us about their kind. They did not evolve through cooperation. They evolved through violence. They are predators in the truest sense. Inviting them into our war is inviting a plague into our homes." High Admiral stood to respond. He had spent 3 days with the humans. He had watched them, studied them, spoken with them for hours. What he had learned had terrified him at first. Now it gave him something he had almost forgotten how to feel. "The legends are incomplete," said. "Yes, they are predators. Yes, they come from a death world. But they are also something else. Something the legends never mentioned." "And what is that?" demanded. Looked at Grace Holland. She nodded slightly, giving him permission to share what she had told him. "They are pack-bonding creatures," said. "They form emotional connections with anything. Their own kind, other species, even animals that should be their enemies. On their world, they tamed wolves and made them into companions. They ride on the backs of beasts that could crush them. They adopt creatures and call them family. Their capacity for attachment is beyond anything we have ever encountered." The chamber fell silent. His compound eyes flickered with uncertainty. In another part of the station, Dr. Shaw sat in a medical examination room. She was a human scientist, 50 years old with gray streaks in her dark hair. Around her, Alliance medical officers scanned her body with instruments she did not recognize. They had been at this for hours, and their expressions had shifted from curiosity to disbelief to something close to fear. "Your skeletal system," one of them said. "It repairs itself after breaking." Nodded, "Yes, bones heal. Sometimes they become stronger at the break point." "Your immune system attacks invaders by raising your internal temperature to levels that would kill most species. We call it a fever. It is uncomfortable but usually effective. The medical officer set down his scanner. His four-fingered hands were trembling. You consume ethanol recreationally, a substance that is poisonous to nearly every known form of life. Smiled, we call it alcohol. It is traditional at celebrations. The officer looked at his colleagues. None of them could find words. They had spent their careers studying biology, and nothing had prepared them for a species that treated poison as a party drink. In the examination room next door, Daniel Perry was demonstrating human physical capabilities for a group of Alliance military observers. A soldier named had volunteered to spar with him. Was considered one of the finest warriors in the fleet. He was tall and strong and had trained for decades. The match lasted 8 seconds. Daniel moved with a speed that the observers could barely track. He redirected A's strike, swept his legs, and pinned him to the ground with a hold that immobilized every limb. A struggled, but Daniel's grip was absolute. When he finally released A stood slowly, his eyes wide with shock. "How did you do that?" asked. "I am twice your mass." Daniel shrugged. "Humans are pursuit predators. We are not the fastest or the strongest, but we are efficient. We can run for hours without stopping. We can track prey across continents. And we learned long ago that technique matters more than size." The observers exchanged glances. One of them, a small reptilian creature, raised her hand nervously. "Is it true that your species once fought wars that lasted for generations?" she asked. Daniel's expression darkened slightly. "Yes, we are not proud of everything in our history. We have done terrible things to each other, but we learned from those mistakes. We built something better." "And now," the reptilian asked, "what do your people fight for now?" Daniel looked at her for a long moment. "Now we fight for anyone who needs us. That is why we are here." Back in the council chamber, Grace Holland finally spoke. Her voice was calm and clear, cutting through the lingering tension like a blade. "I understand your fear," she said. "The legends about us are mostly true. We are survivors of a harsh world. We are capable of great violence, but we are also capable of great love. We crossed the emptiness between stars because we could not bear the loneliness. We spent centuries calling out into the darkness, hoping someone would answer. You are the answer to prayers we did not even know we were making." She stepped forward, looking at each council member in turn. "They are destroying you," she continued. "They will not stop until your species are extinct. You have been fighting alone for 300 years. You do not have to fight alone anymore." Clicked his mandibles. "And if we refuse your help, if we send you away?" Grace smiled sadly. "Then we will go. We do not force ourselves on anyone, but we will remember that you were here. We will remember that we found you and could not help you, and that memory will haunt us forever." The chamber was silent. Watched the council members wrestle with their decision. They were afraid of humans, and perhaps they had reason to be, but they were more afraid of extinction. The vote was close, but it passed. The Alliance would accept human assistance. After the session ended, Grace found a quiet observation deck and stood alone, looking out at the stars. Daniel joined her a few minutes later. "They are terrified of us," he said. Grace nodded. "They should be. We are terrifying, but we are also their only chance." She pulled a communication device from her pocket and activated a channel that reached across light years. When the connection established, she spoke 3 sentences that would change the galaxy forever. "We found them. They need help. Send everything." Somewhere in the distant reaches of space, the human fleet began to move. Humans were only legends, until we advanced into battle. Part 3. 3 months passed, and the Alliance held its breath. They continued their advance, taking 2 more colony worlds while the defenders waited for salvation that might never come. Doubt spread through the fleet like a sickness. Many believed the humans had abandoned them. Many believed the legends were nothing but stories after all. Then the sensors lit up with contacts. High Admiral was on the bridge when the first human ships emerged from hyperspace. He had seen fleets before. He had commanded armadas and faced impossible odds, but nothing had prepared him for what came through that rift in space. 200 warships dropped into formation at the edge of territory. They were massive, angular things, built without elegance or beauty. Every line of their construction spoke of function over form. Their hulls were thick and covered in armor plating that seemed excessive by any standard. Weapons bristled from every surface. These were not exploration vessels or diplomatic transports. These were machines designed for one purpose and one purpose only: war. The lead ship was called the Resolute, and it dwarfed everything else in the combined fleet. Admiral Samuel Grant stood on its bridge, a gray-haired man of 60 with calm eyes that had seen too many battles. When his image appeared once, the felt a strange mix of relief and unease. "High Admiral," Grant said, his voice steady and warm. "I apologize for the delay. We came as quickly as we could." Stared at the fleet displayed on his tactical screens. 200 ships, each one armed more heavily than anything the Alliance had ever built. "Your vessels," said slowly, "they have no recreational spaces, no gardens, no meditation chambers." Grant smiled slightly. "We can rest when the war is over. Our ships are built to fight. Everything else is a luxury we cannot afford right now." The human fleet integrated with the Alliance formation over the following days. Grace Holland served as a liaison between the forces, helping the alien commanders understand human tactics and capabilities. It was not an easy process. The humans fought differently than any species the Alliance had encountered. Strategy focused on precise strikes and careful retreats. They conserved their forces and accepted losses as inevitable. Human strategy was something else entirely. When Daniel Perry presented their battle doctrine to the Alliance War Council, several commanders had to leave the room. "You advance into superior firepower," one of them asked, his voice trembling, deliberately. Daniel nodded. "When the enemy expects you to retreat, advance. When they expect you to pause, accelerate. Humans win wars by being unpredictable. We win by refusing to do what makes sense." "That is insanity," the commander said. Daniel's expression did not change. "We have won a lot of wars with that insanity." On the border of Alliance space, a patrol squadron discovered the human fleet. Commander received the report aboard his flagship, a massive vessel called the Annihilator. He was ancient by standards, a veteran of 2 centuries of conquest. He had never lost a campaign. The report spoke of unknown vessels with impossible armament. It spoke of a species called humans, creatures from legend. Dismissed the report as exaggeration. The Alliance was desperate, inventing mythological allies to boost morale. He ordered a raiding party to investigate and destroy these supposed legends. The raiding party consisted of 12 warships, each one capable of destroying a cruiser in single combat. They found a human patrol group of 4 vessels near an abandoned mining station. The battle lasted 4 minutes. The humans did not flee. They did not negotiate. They did not even slow down. They accelerated directly toward the formation, absorbing fire that should have crippled them. Their weapons struck with precision and fury. When it was over, 12 ships were burning wreckage, and the human patrol was already moving on to their next waypoint. Watched the battle recordings in silence. His officers stood around him, waiting for orders, but he had none to give. For the first time in his long career, he did not know what to do. "The legends," one of his officers whispered, "they are real." Turned on him with fury in his eyes. "Legends do not destroy fleets. Legends do not fly ships. Whatever these creatures are, they can be killed like anything else." But doubt had taken root in his mind. He reviewed the recordings again, studying the human tactics. They had taken damage that would have disabled vessels. They had kept fighting. Their weapons had pierced armor as if it were made of paper. He composed a message and sent it to the human fleet. It was a demand for surrender and immediate withdrawal. He promised destruction if they refused. He expected them to negotiate, to stall, to buy time for reinforcements. Admiral Grant's response arrived within the hour. It contained only 5 words. "Come and make us." Stared at the message for a long time. Then he began issuing orders. The collective would mobilize its entire fleet. Every ship, every soldier, every weapon they possessed would converge on space. They would crush these humans before the legend could spread. They would prove that nothing could stand against the collective. But deep in his chest, in a place he would never admit existed, felt something cold and unfamiliar. He had studied the recordings carefully. He had seen the way the humans moved, the way they fought, the way they refused to stop even when logic demanded surrender. The ancient texts of a dozen conquered species spoke of death, creatures from planets so hostile that survival itself was a miracle, beings who evolved not to avoid danger but to overcome it, predators who never stopped hunting once they chose their prey. Had dismissed those texts as superstition. Now he wondered if he had made a terrible mistake. The fleet began to assemble. 2,000 ships gathered at the edge of contested space. It was the largest force the collective had ever deployed against a single enemy. Aboard the Resolute, Admiral Grant received the intelligence reports with a grim smile. "They are afraid," Grace Holland observed. Grant nodded. "Good. Afraid enemies make mistakes." He turned to face his bridge crew, men and women who had volunteered for this mission, knowing they might never return home. "They think they know what we are," Grant said. "They think we are monsters from legend. They think we are here to destroy. Let us show them what humans really are. Let us show them that we fight not because we love war, but because we love what war protects." The fleet acknowledged his orders. 200 human ships prepared for battle. Around them, the Alliance fleet formed up, their alien crews watching the humans with a mixture of fear and hope. The legends had come to life. Now they would advance into battle. Humans were only legends, until we advanced into battle. Part 4. The fleet emerged from hyperspace above Prime like a dark cloud spreading across the sky. Over 1,000 warships arranged themselves in perfect formation, their weapons charged and ready. Commander stood on the bridge of the Annihilator and surveyed the battlefield. The Alliance fleet was outnumbered more than 3 to 1. This would not be a battle. This would be an execution. But among the Alliance vessels, 200 ships held a different formation. They were positioned at the front, their heavy armor facing the enemy. The human fleet waited in silence and felt that cold uncertainty return to his chest. High Admiral watched from his flagship as they approached. His hands trembled slightly on the command console. 300 years of war had led to this moment. Everything depended on what happened in the next few hours. "Admiral Grant," he said through the communication channel, "they have us surrounded. Standard doctrine would suggest a fighting retreat." Grant's face appeared on he was smiling. "Standard doctrine would be wrong," Grant replied. "All human ships advance." Watched in disbelief as the human fleet accelerated toward the enemy. They were not forming defensive positions. They were not preparing to retreat. They were charging directly into the heart of the formation. Saw it too, and for a moment he thought the humans were committing suicide. No rational species would attack against such odds. No logical commander would waste ships so carelessly. Then the first human weapon struck his fleet, and everything changed. The human ships fired in coordinated waves, their weapons punching through armor with devastating efficiency. Ships that had survived centuries of combat exploded in seconds. The returned fire and their weapons found their marks. Human vessels shuddered under the impact. Hull breaches opened. Fires erupted in compartments. But the human ships did not stop. They did not slow down. They kept coming. Aboard the Resolute, damage reports flooded the bridge. Sections of the ship were exposed to vacuum. Power systems were failing. Lieutenant Daniel Perry coordinated repair teams while explosions rocked the deck beneath his feet. "Forward batteries are gone," a damage control officer reported. "We have lost 30% of our weapons." Admiral Grant did not hesitate. "Continue the advance. Ram them if you have to." The battle raged for hours. Human ships took damage that would have crippled any Alliance vessel and kept fighting. Their crews rotated through combat stations without rest, fueled by nothing but determination and the knowledge that retreat was not an option. In the chaos of battle, Grace Holland worked in the Resolute's medical bay. She was not a doctor, but there were not enough doctors for the wounded flooding in. She bandaged burns and held the hands of dying soldiers and refused to let herself feel anything but focus. A young ensign looked up at her from his stretcher. His legs were gone below the knee. "Are we winning?" he asked. Grace squeezed his hand. "We are still fighting. That means we are winning." On the surface of Prime, the had landed ground forces. Thousands of soldiers poured into the capital city, their weapons cutting through the defenders like fire through dry grass. The Alliance ground troops fell back, overwhelmed, and then the human arrived. Corporal Maria Santos led her squad through the burning streets. She was 23 years old, with dark hair tied back and eyes that had seen too much death for someone her age. Around her, human soldiers moved with practiced efficiency, their weapons barking in the smoke-filled air. A squad appeared at the end of the street. Maria did not hesitate. She charged forward, firing as she ran, her squad following without question. They had never faced soldiers who attacked instead of retreating. They died before they could adapt. Civilians huddled in the ruins of their homes, watching these strange creatures from legend fight through their city. The humans were smaller than the weaker individually, but they moved with a fury that seemed impossible. When they were wounded, they kept fighting. When their weapons ran empty, they used knives. When their knives broke, they used their hands. Maria took a round to her shoulder and kept moving. Another round grazed her leg. She stumbled but did not fall. Her medic patched her wounds while she continued directing fire. A cry cut through the battle noise. Maria turned and saw a collapsed building, smoke pouring from the rubble. A small voice was screaming from inside. "Cover me," she said to her squad, and before anyone could stop her, she was running toward the building. The structure was unstable. Flames licked at the supports. Any moment could bring the whole thing down. Maria did not care. She pushed through the debris until she found the source of the screaming. A child, no more than 5 years old, was trapped under a fallen beam. She was small and blue-skinned, with wide eyes full of terror. Maria grabbed the beam and lifted with everything she had. Her wounded shoulder screamed in protest. Blood soaked through her bandages. The beam moved just enough. Maria grabbed the child and pulled her free, holding her close as she ran for the exit. The building collapsed behind them, sending a wave of dust and heat across her back. Outside, Maria's squad surrounded her. The child clung to her neck, trembling and crying. An officer approached, his face twisted with emotion. "Why did you do that? You could have died." Maria looked at him, then at the child in her arms. She was scared. I could not leave her scared. In orbit, the battle had reached its turning point. The fleet had lost 300 ships. The humans had lost 57, but the remaining vessels fought with undiminished fury. Commander watched his tactical display and saw something he had never seen before. His fleet was breaking. Not physically, not yet, but something had changed in his commanders. They had expected legends to be exaggerated. They had expected humans to be mortal and limited. Instead, they had found an enemy that refused to acknowledge defeat. An enemy that took wounds that should be fatal and kept fighting. An enemy that charged when it should retreat and attacked when it should surrender. They had conquered 100 species. They had always won because their enemies eventually gave up. They calculated acceptable losses and chose survival over victory. Humans did not calculate acceptable losses. Humans did not give up. Gave the order to retreat. His officers stared at him in shock. They had never retreated. The collective did not retreat. Look at them, said, gesturing at the. They are broken and bleeding and burning, and they are still coming. This is not a species we can defeat through attrition. They will keep fighting until there is nothing left of them, and they will take us with them. The fleet turned and ran. 1,000 warships, the greatest armada in galactic history, fled from an enemy one-fifth their size. On the bridge of the Resolute, Admiral Grant watched them go. Blood trickled from a cut on his forehead. His ship was barely functional, but they had won. High Admiral's voice came through the communication channel. His words were quiet, almost reverent. The legend said you were monsters. Grant wiped the blood from his eyes and looked out at the retreating enemy. Monsters do not save children from burning buildings. Below them, on the surface of Prime, Maria Santos sat in the rubble with a small blue-skinned child sleeping in her arms. The battle was over. The city was saved. And the legends had proven themselves to be something the galaxy never expected. Humans were only legends, until we advanced into battle Part 5. 6 months had passed since the Battle of Prime, and the galaxy had changed forever. The collective had retreated to their core systems, abandoning dozens of conquered worlds. For the first time in 300 years, the Alliance was reclaiming territory instead of losing it. The war was not over, but the tide had turned. Across Alliance space, the perception of humans had transformed. They were no longer just legends of terrifying predators. They were the species that had come when no one else would. They were the soldiers who had charged into impossible odds and somehow survived. They were the strangers who had crossed the stars not for conquest, but for connection. Grace Holland stood in the great hall of the Alliance capital, wearing a formal uniform she had never expected to wear. Today she would become the first human ambassador to the Alliance. Today, history would remember. The ceremony was attended by representatives of 7 species now. Humans had earned their place at the table, written in the blood and sacrifice of those who had fought at Prime. Grace looked out at the assembled delegates and felt the weight of the moment pressing down on her shoulders. High Admiral introduced her with words that made her chest tight with emotion. 6 months ago, I did not believe in legends. I believed in mathematics and probability and the cold logic of war. The mathematics said we would die. Every calculation, every model, every prediction pointed to extinction. And then the legends walked out of hyperspace and proved me wrong. He turned to face Grace directly. Commander Holland, Ambassador Holland, your people did not have to come, you did not have to stay, you did not have to bleed for us, but you did. And for that, the Alliance will be grateful for as long as we exist. Grace stepped forward to the podium. The hall fell silent. When I was a child, she began, I used to lie in the grass at night and look up at the stars. I wondered if anyone was out there. I wondered if we were alone in all that darkness. My parents told me that someday we would find out. They told me that humanity would reach the stars and discover the truth. She paused, looking at the faces before her, and so many others, beings she had never imagined, lives she had never expected to touch. We found you, she continued. We found you in pain. We found you dying, and we could not walk away. That is not who we are. Humanity has made many mistakes in our history. We have hurt each other and ourselves in ways that shame us still. But we have also learned. We have learned that connection matters more than conquest. We have learned that protecting others gives life meaning. We have learned that the darkness between stars is not empty if we fill it with friendship. She raised her hand in a gesture of peace. The Alliance accepted us when you had every reason to fear us. You trusted the legends even when logic told you to run. We will not forget that trust. We will honor it with everything we have. From this day forward, humanity stands with the Alliance, not as conquerors, not as legends, as friends. The hall erupted in applause that crossed species and language and biology. Something new had been born in that moment, something that would echo through the ages. In the capital city below, Corporal Maria Santos walked through streets that had been rubble 6 months ago. Reconstruction teams were everywhere, rebuilding what they had destroyed. Citizens stopped to stare at her as she passed. Some bowed their heads in respect. Others reached out to touch her arm, as if contact with a human might transfer some of that legendary strength. She found the building she was looking for, a small residence in a quiet district. When she knocked, the door opened to reveal a face she had thought about every day since the battle. The child was named. She was 6 years old now, bright and curious and no longer afraid. When she saw Maria, her face lit up with joy. "You came back," said. Maria knelt down to meet her eyes. "I promised I would." Parents stood behind her, their expressions filled with emotion that needed no translation. They had watched their daughter nearly die in a collapsed building. They had watched a stranger from legend risk everything to save her. "You gave her nightmares for weeks," his mother said softly. "She dreamed of the fire and the darkness, but she also dreamed of the soldier who came for her. She calls you her guardian." Maria reached into her pocket and pulled out a small patch. It was the insignia of her unit, worn and faded from months of combat. "This is for you," she said too, "so you remember that someone will always come for you. No matter how dark it gets, no matter how scared you are, there will always be someone fighting to reach you." Took the patch with trembling hands. She looked at it like it was the most precious thing in the universe. "Are all humans like you?" she asked. Maria smiled. "We try to be." That evening, Daniel Perry and High Admiral shared a drink on an observation deck overlooking the rebuilt city. The stars stretched out before them, cold and beautiful and full of possibility. "I was wrong about your kind," said. "I thought the legends meant you were monsters. I thought your strength came from cruelty." Daniel took a sip of his drink. "A lot of species make that mistake." "Your strength comes from something else," continued. "I have watched your soldiers. I have seen them fight and bleed and die. And I have seen them save children and comfort the wounded and weep for their fallen. Your strength comes from love." Daniel looked out at the stars. Humans have a long history of being underestimated. People see our persistence and think it is stubbornness. They see our determination and think it is aggression. They do not understand that we fight so hard because we care so much. Raised his glass. "To humanity, may the galaxy never underestimate you again." They drank together, two warriors from different worlds, united by something that transcended species and biology and the cold mathematics of war. In the intelligence headquarters of the collective, a young officer named presented his report to the military council. He had spent 6 months studying human history, learning everything he could about the species that had turned the tide of a 3-century war. "Their recorded history spans approximately 10,000 years," said. "In that time they have fought an estimated 15,000 wars among themselves. Civilizations rose and fell. Empires expanded and collapsed. Through it all they kept building. They kept advancing. They kept reaching for something beyond themselves." The council listened in silence. "They crossed the void between stars because they could not stop wondering what was out there," continued. "They found us, and instead of conquering us, they asked to be friends. They found the alliance, and instead of exploiting their weakness, they offered to help. This is not rational behavior. This is not logical strategy." He paused, his voice dropping to something close to fear. "They cannot be defeated through attrition. They cannot be broken through time. Every obstacle they encounter becomes a challenge to overcome. Every setback becomes a lesson to learn. They do not know how to stop." The council chamber was silent for a long moment. "What do you recommend?" the council leader finally asked. Looked at his superiors with eyes that had seen too much truth. "I recommend we find a way to make peace before they decide. They do not want it anymore." In the Alliance capital, Grace Holland looked out at the stars from her new office. An official had asked her what humans wanted from the Alliance now that they had proven themselves. It was a fair question. Humanity had crossed light years and sacrificed lives for this moment. What did they expect in return? Grace thought about all the years of searching, all the messages sent into the void, all the dreams of finding someone out there in the darkness. She smiled. Friends, we came all this way looking for friends. And across the galaxy, in ships and stations and worlds beyond counting, beings of every shape and form looked up at the stars and thought about the legends that had become real. The death, the persistence hunters, the pack-bonding predators who crossed the universe because they could not bear to be alone. Humans were only legends, until they advanced into battle and proved that legends could be kind.